I would like to tell you the story of my very first funeral. Some of you may know this story. I've told it in the past. I wasn't even a priest. I was a seminarian living at St. Monica's Church, and I was doing my stage, which means it's an experimental time, you know, when you have to learn by doing. And a call came in one night. It was a brother priest who had a call to go to a funeral home and do a service there. But he had found out that his own sister had fallen terribly sick, and so he had to leave town to be with her. And so he was phoning around somewhat desperately to try and find someone to take this service in the funeral home. So I thought to myself, well, it's not a mass. I'm not a priest, but it's not a mass, so I could do it. So I said, okay, I'll do it. Figured, how hard can this be, right? So I got the funeral book off the shelf. I started to flip through it to get familiar with it, picked a couple of readings, put on a tie, got in my car, and zoomed off to the funeral home. When I get there, the funeral director takes me aside and says, "Thank you very much for coming, but there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. The family didn't realize that when they checked the Catholic box off on the form that we would actually be calling for a Catholic priest to come. And they don't really have any faith. And so we were wondering if you could do a service but not mention God too much." No word of a lie. This is what happened. My very first one. So I look at her and I say, "No, I can't do that. But don't worry, it'll work out." Brave words, right? Well, if I was nervous before, now I'm really nervous. So I put on my white robe, you know, and I walk into the room, and I have to say, there was this really oppressive atmosphere. Have you ever noticed that sometimes a room, the air just seems different depending on the mood of the people in the room? There was this oppressive atmosphere in the room. The woman was in her coffin. There were a couple of candles, a number of chairs. You know, people were sitting in the chairs facing the coffin. But nobody was saying anything. It was dead silence. So I walk into the room, and people start to glare at me. What is he doing here? What is going on here? So I put on a smile and introduced myself, and I said, you know, we're here in order to say goodbye, and to do so in a way that gives us a chance to look backwards, but also to look forwards. And so, to the extent that you wish, I didn't force anybody, to the extent that you wish, you may join in this time of prayer. And so I had my book, and I have to admit, I kept my eyes in the book a lot during this time. Didn't want to look up too much to see what was going on. So we get to the opening prayer. There's a reading. I explain the reading. You know, what is the meaning of Christian hope? That it's not just about death, it's about life and hope. That seemed to have some effect. And then we got to the general intercessions. Now we all know what general intercessions are. It's a series of prayers where usually we conclude each prayer with, we pray to the Lord, and the answer is, Lord, hear our prayer. So I told them we'll be doing these intercessions, and you may, if you wish, respond with, Lord, hear our prayer after each one. So I do the first one, and I hear, Lord, hear our prayer. Really, really low. I do the second one, Lord, hear our prayer. Third one, Lord, hear our prayer. The fourth one, Lord, hear our prayer. The volume was going up, the clarity was going up. Unfortunately, in the funeral book, there's a lot of these, so we had time to jack it up quite a bit. I had my eyes in that book, and I look up by the end of it, and that atmosphere changed. The look on the faces was different. The glaring of the eyes was no longer there. It was a transformation, really, from the beginning to the end. And so I concluded the prayer. It's not a very long service, you know. I concluded it, and then afterwards, the husband, who I had been told by the funeral director, had made sure to point out that he didn't want a religious thing, came up to me and said, will you be able to come back for the burial? He said, there's something there. And as I was leaving, a couple of people who were outside smoking said, what you said about life after death, we believe that. Something about it confirmed something in that. I did not need any further lessons in the seminary about the power of funerals. I can tell you that. I learned it very, very practically. Death in a faith perspective, death in a non-faith perspective, I had the two in one ceremony. We started at one extreme, we ended up in another. And I could see the difference that it made just on people's faces alone. So faith really does make a difference.